Well, should we get started and see how people trickle in?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, hi everyone. My name is Tanner Regan. I'm chair for the session. I'm quite excited that I got to be chair and see what you guys are all doing on new data to inform urban policies. It sounds quite exciting to me. So, I'm glad to be involved. Great. And so we're going to start with Champaka Raja Gopal. Is that right? Who is an institutions expert at City Planning Labs at the World Bank. And you know, I think the slides should already be up there.
Yes. You're the first one. Yes.
And I don't know, it's a small room, so you can present standing up, you can present sitting down, whatever you're.
Sure. I'm happy to sit down and this is a productive discussion. I'd love to have feedback from all of you, really, on the work we're doing. We're all quite passionate about it. Thank you so much.
Great. So you have 20 minutes. Take it away.
Good morning, everyone. My colleague Gayatri Singh, who is the primary author of this paper, has joined us online. My name is Champaka, as you all know. My other colleagues are from the City Planning Labs Initiative have also joined us online, and it's exciting to have all of them be part of this effort with us today here. So in this paper, we argue in favor of an ecosystem approach to which brings together technology, regulation, and people to build foundations for smarter cities. In the recent years, technology change spurred national and subnational governments and private tech corporations. Together, they promote technology as an end to rapidly resolve persisting urban challenges. Just the creation of extensive geospatial data, city governments presumed would alleviate inadequate access to basic services and enable the promise of better quality of life for all. However, nationally sponsored smart city schemes, which promise efficient transitions, particularly in middle and low-income countries, have far from yielded results in terms of basic services for all and equitable redistribution of resources. The outcomes are contentious, since patchy efforts leave cities politically, administratively, and financially weaker than before, making them less livable. We make three arguments about the current dispensation towards smart cities. Technology bias underlies the imagination of smart cities. National level strategies to mainstream data governance have been poorly implemented at local levels. Siloed governance weakens municipal government capacity to use data to predict risks and deal with crises such as climate change impact or even deliver their obligatory functions. To deconstruct these arguments, we draw on debates in social science and geography where scholars have critiqued smart cities as fragments of urban development. A key gap is to empirically acknowledge solutions to these challenges in the sphere of practice and situate them within critical theoretical debates. In this paper, as urban and institutional specialists engaged with practice and research in active ways, we intend to nuance scholarly debates by exploring the World Bank City Planning Labs initiative as a contribution to scholarship and practice. Let's deconstruct these three arguments. First, technological bias underlies the logic of smart cities, whereby the primary interface between people and decision makers lies in hardware and software, not direct interactions between governments and people. In Indonesia, for example, city mayors designate information and communication technology departments as custodians of their smart cities programs, often leaving out urban planning and service delivery agencies from decision-making processes, even within their own political jurisdictions. Mayors try and capture votes through a plethora of uncoordinated apps, which are weakly connected to municipal processes. Public participation with no planned outcomes in this scenario often translates into political opportunism. The result is internal power struggles and competition between ICT departments and others, as opposed to coordination, which is the intended outcome. Tech goggles, as some scholars argue, tend to increase the gap between policymakers' intentions and outcomes, widening the gap between governments and inhabitants. The second argument is about macro level initiatives to establish national spatial data infrastructures, or NSDI, which have remained weakly implemented at the micro level in countries where regulatory derivatives for citywide benefits are not in place. Even in countries and governments which have programmatically created avenues for implementation of NSDI, their administration has remained quite patchy. Indonesia, while being tech biased, also has strong political commitment to support data sharing across different levels of the government. Its National Spatial Information Networks, the GIGN, has robust institutional frameworks and regulations which coordinate data sharing across 57 ministries, 34 provinces, 514 regencies and cities. These nodes are structured as the Geospatial Information Agency, or Badan Informasi Geospasial, BIG, at the national level, accompanied by production and management dissemination units at the local levels. However, this framework, which is well thought through, has remained mostly confined to the macro level of policy, since at the micro level, municipal governments do not have an enabling ecosystem or technical capacity to implement it. The Smart Cities mission in India, covering 100 cities, throws open a different problem. It adopts a governance model where national and state governments establish special purpose vehicles at the municipal level. As mission-led companies driven to performance, that's really the key sort of an objective here, performance. Smart SPVs are designed to exclude local day-to-day political interference. In this scenario, governments and private corporations often interact through customized bilateral relationships, mostly contracts, and specific project sites, circumventing democratic oversight. Boards of directors of smart companies involving administrators from subnational and municipal levels become instruments of opaque political opportunism, again here in this context as well. Here, SPVs smartly position their efforts as value-neutral interventions which promise to catalyze citywide benefits. However, in reality, in their attempt to attract high-end private investments, these projects privilege some at the expense of others. The third argument is an outcome of the above anomalies. The absence of a citywide strategy and holistic approach to data governance at the local levels is preventing the ability of cities to make data-driven decisions. This is true for city governments, even in financially stable contexts. In siloed governance arrangements, when custodianship of geospatial data is biased or unclear, and political commitments to outcomes are partial, city governments are not able to mobilize the data and information they already possess to fulfill their basic welfareist obligations. The Data for Better Lives report of the World Bank shows that less than 20% of middle and low-income countries have data ecosystems that allow governments to act with robust information. Even where data systems and governance frameworks exist, a lack of institutions with sufficient administrative capacity, decision-making autonomy, and financial resources holds back their effective implementation. And this we're saying also from our experience of having worked not just with Indonesia, but a whole range of other countries, and I'll come to that. India and Indonesia as generic cases, therefore, of smart cities initiatives point to four fundamental gaps in terms of data governance. First, government's reliance on new institutional arrangements such as special purpose vehicles distances municipal governments from inhabitants of cities and their changing local needs. The absence of involvement of municipal governments as a whole results in fragmented city visions, sustains sectoral silos, and uneven development. Second, cities lack accurate, updated data in formats that are intercompatible across departments. Typically, these departments are creating their own data sets. There's no possibility for them to share data. Third, weak ecosystem capacities in terms of technology, regulation, and people prevents timely application of data for decision-making. There's delay in decision-making quite often because departments are not able to come together. They're not able to share data. Fourth, treating technological innovations as an end shifts focus to sporadic, temporary innovations. It's most often just low-hanging fruit. Government departments are just willing to make use of them for visibility and optics purposes. The lack of a systemic approach to data governance delays decisions, increases the cost of basic service delivery, and increases risks. At stake is nothing short of transparent and coordinated decision-making, sustainable development of cities, and effective management of urbanization itself. We explored the World Bank's city planning labs as a considered response for implementing national spatial data infrastructure, while strengthening multiple structural challenges of siloed governance and technology bias that smart cities produce. City planning labs, we learned, is from our experience, we know it is a practice initiative of the World Bank supported by the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, SECO, and Sustainable Urban and Regional Development, this is SURGE. CPL's initial efforts were in 3 cities in Indonesia, Semarang, Denpasar, Balikpapan. Each municipal government has institutionalized data governance over 5 to 6 years of CPL's assistance. From our ethnographic learnings, city planning labs makes 2 overarching arguments. The first, macro level initiatives of national governments to mainstream data governance have to be accompanied by regulatory derivatives which facilitate implementation at local levels in cities. And second, that technology solutions must go hand in hand with legal and human dimensions of urban development. CPL thus proposes Municipal Spatial Data Infrastructure, or MSDI, as a simple, practical, and doable set of measures for city governments in order to enable implementation of the NSDI. And the simplicity is important because it can be overwhelming for cities which are not capable of handling some of this complexity that data governance brings. For instance, in one of our interactions with officers at Balikpapan, the officer said, data governance is a scary ghost. So from our experience, we argue that it's important that these solutions need to be simple and doable. Discarding siloed boundaries of mission-led development, the MSDI approach integrates national and local government policy and operational practices by entrusting political accountabilities for data-led decisions at subnational levels and custodianship of urban data governance with municipal governments. Custodianship is again a concept that we've discussed in our paper, in terms of having custodianship of data as close as possible to the people who are producing this data. Otherwise, there are questions about authenticity and other ethical questions about the production and use of data. MSDI is a comprehensive framework involving 4 building blocks, namely institutional arrangements, people, data, and systems, the IPDS framework. Institutional arrangements pertains to organizational responsibilities and the role of city governments to enable a regulatory environment to foster the growth of a broader geospatial ecosystem, because our consistent argument is we need a broader ecosystem to make this work. It's not just performance, it's not just technology, we need the full ecosystem to be in place. Institutional arrangements is the first pillar, is the first building block. Then we have people, which refers to creating capacity needs in human resource with respect to geospatial skills and strengthening institutional relationships. Data refers to data availability, to quality of data, data-related policies, data standards, formats, analysis of data, sharing of geospatial information, the various consistencies that are required across different databases, across different departments for sharing data. This building block also considers the business case for investment in data and the extent to which the use of geospatial information can add value for departments to meet their respective key performance indicators. So key performance indicators are certainly a part of the framework, but it's not the only aspect that we're targeting in this broader ecosystem approach. Systems refers to software, hardware, and physical IT-related infrastructure required to support MSDI, such as a public-facing geoportal that combines GIS and spatially referenced tabular data. The IPDS framework offers an ecosystem approach to data governance, countering technology bias, siloed governance, and fostering municipal government capacity to mobilize data for making informed decisions. Let's take a step back to reflect on the idea of state capacity. Scholarly interpretations on state capacity stem from multiple disciplinary perspectives. Organization theorists interpret state capacity as the ability of state agencies to accomplish their goals and missions through effective organizational design and cohesion. Sociologists view state capacity as organizational capacity of the bureaucracy. Public policy scholars see state capacity as the ability of states to plan and execute laws and policies with transparency. A parallel perspective is about how just and all-encompassing states are in terms of their goals and redistribution of resources. Some political scientists view state capacity in terms of extractive capacities of states and power. Then the ability of states to practice democratic decision-making. The World Bank's perspective is one of quality of governance, which focuses on processes of decision-making. MSDI situates quality of governance as quality of relationships between agencies, not just of the state, but between the state and non-state agencies involved in the IPDS framework. Addressing deeper foundational gaps in the idea of institutional capacity, the IPDS framework widens the thinking about ecosystem capacities where strong municipal governments are capable of orchestrating multiple actors, public, private, and inhabitants of cities, quite often misaligned in their values and goals, to accomplish their own welfareist goals. So it's not an easy task to bring them all together, and data plays a very crucial role. Geospatial data plays a very crucial role in strengthening their abilities to do so. Through empirical studies by partner agencies, we know that the expected benefits of geospatial data investments are approximately 3.2 times larger than costs. We have reference to this in our report, in our paper. To show how this is possible, here we focus on Indonesia, considering over 6 years of CPL's engagement with 3 medium-sized cities. So let's take a look at how Semarang, Balikpapan, and Denpasar offer insights on leveraging geospatial data governance to strengthen ecosystem capacities. All 3 cities face different types of environmental vulnerabilities. Semarang, with a population of 1.6 million people, faces land subsidence, frequent storms, and earthquakes. Balikpapan, with more than 500,000 people, faces flooding, forest, and land fire, and extreme waves. Denpasar's international and local economic fabric is threatened by multiple environmental hazards and sanitation concerns, given that it's Bali. All of these aspects become critical, both local as well as international economic impetus. Their efforts, all of these cities, are to improve prediction through the use of geospatial data and build up service delivery towards city resilience. While the 3 cities were part of the 100 Smart Cities initiative in Indonesia, we reiterate the significance of spatial data infrastructure approach for ecosystem benefits. To set out, all 3 cities recognize the importance of the institutional arrangements building block as fundamental to establishing a sustainable MSDI. Notwithstanding constraints posed by COVID-19 pandemic, in all 3 cities, Semarang, Balikpapan, and Denpasar, mayors issued local data governance decrees. The initiative to establish the institutional arrangements building blocks confirmed budgetary prioritizations for creation of relevant data standards, building people capacity, and setting up geoportals in terms of systems, and also adopting a whole range of urban planning tools to enable urban planning departments to make decisions in judicious ways. Data sharing empowered them to leverage data for decision-making in most vulnerable circumstances. The decree also clarified interdependencies between the 4 building blocks. As part of this effort, all 3 cities also initiated coordination with national geospatial agencies to ensure alignment with national priorities and the NSDI. Then the pandemic magnified the urgency and importance of city resilience. City governments felt the need for real-time, accurate, and reliable data to respond in a timely way and to plan for dealing with the pandemic as well as social and economic recovery. In conditions of social distancing, cities in Indonesia intended to mobilize geospatial data to overcome traditional constraints of paper-led administration. However, lack of technical capacity to use geospatial data did not allow cities to take timely action for the families and people who needed immediate attention. At this critical juncture, the Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of Indonesia, requested technical assistance from the World Bank to develop and scale up one of City Planning Labs' tool, the CoLab data tool, which allowed easy aggregation and integration of locally collected data. Using this tool, government officials could rapidly prioritize action within available resources, match measures to be taken with national budgeting, and deliver services where most needed. The city of Semarang was immediately able to adopt this tool. The tool was named Siap Tanggap, or Siap, which translates into ready to respond. The tool helped the city government to access geocoded local data, manage and analyze this data, and take relevant remedial measures. Since Semarang had invested time and resources in building a data ecosystem over a period of 5 to 6 years, the planning department, Bapeda, was immediately able to use this collab data tool to identify clusters of contagion on a real-time basis. So this particular aspect of investing time and effort in this process is important, as opposed to the hastened approaches to embrace smart cities as an idea that most national governments in medium and low-income economies tend to pursue. The Semarang government first expanded data access internally between departments and then externally to inhabitants of the city. So here's where institutional relationships become central to urban data governance. Within a week, Semarang reached nearly 80% of its neighborhoods, gathering information from over 7,000 individuals. This demonstrates the effectiveness of geospatial data in crisis situations. Siap represents the success of an ecosystem approach in bringing communities and governments closer, particularly in socially vulnerable circumstances. And this is quite in contrast with the outcomes that we see from the smart cities initiatives that we discussed earlier. Semarang's success with Collab data tool highlights the transformative potential of MSDI. There have been a whole range of other innovations as well in terms of setting up one data portal. The city of Balikpapan undertook this effort. The portal is running and being updated on a regular basis. We also have the city of Denpasar, which initiated a review of all of its statutory master plans through this data governance mechanism that they adopted. And there are, over the course of 5 years, all cities acknowledge that by prioritizing data-driven approaches, cities can build resilience, improve service delivery, and ultimately create a more inclusive future for their residents and businesses. These concrete examples demonstrate the amplified benefits of investing time in strengthening an ecosystem approach to enabling city governments to assume custodianship, manage and use data for societal benefits, rather than pursue solely technologically led solutions as an end. They show how an ecosystem approach to establishing MSDI is a comprehensive response to structural gaps in smart cities initiatives that we set out with earlier in this paper. With this success, we learned that, and we know through our own experience, that City Planning Labs is now working with the Indonesian government to develop a geospatial data-enabled tool for capital investment planning, moving from participatory planning to participatory budgeting, while ensuring that political leaders channel scarce resources where most needed. The possibilities are limitless. In Kenya, the global team of City Planning Labs is working with the Program for Results Initiative under the Kenya Urban Support Program of the World Bank to assist them in institutionalizing data ecosystems to accomplish planned outcomes. Jordan has leveraged the MSDI for channeling investments to develop a bus rapid transit system. Ukraine has sought assistance to use urban planning tools to identify suitable locations for housing reconstruction. And we'd argue that the Indian government must also explore moving away from the special purpose vehicles approach to embrace this data ecosystem approach. These shifts are not just surface level. Mainstreaming a data ecosystem at local levels has steered fundamental shifts in the mindsets and behaviors of officials and governments, private firms, investors, and city inhabitants. None of these results and successes materialized overnight. Enabling and supporting these efforts and sustained partnerships between the World Bank, its donors, national and city governments, these partnerships are sort of central to this sustained work that has taken place over the last 7 to 8 years. Through robust partnerships, we hope more national and local governments acknowledge the importance of combining macro-level policy with micro-level regulatory derivatives to make smarter cities. And yes, acknowledgements to all our partners who've the SECO Surge for their support in sustaining efforts to build ecosystem capacities among cities in middle and low-income countries. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. So do we have questions?
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much, Ambaka. It was very, very interesting. Just if you could clarify this question of ownership of the data.
Yes.
If we take the example of geospatial data and what you told us about the custodianship of the data. So maybe you can clarify this, specifically with the role of private corporations that are, I think, more and more involved in the production, but also the calibration, the storage of data, and so on. And also the question of data cost, because in Kenya, for instance, like municipalities, when they want to access some data from other public agencies, they have to pay, and it's very costly. Strong also competition of production and storing and storage, so on, of data. So maybe this question of ownership of data.
Sure, it's one of the most critical questions about the idea of publicness of data versus the commodification of data, which is exactly where the debates lie in scholarly spaces. So in our paper, for example, we've elaborated on this tension of treating this data as public data versus data that can also be treated as something that can be sold and bought between departments, but also across various state, non-state agencies, particularly the private sector. And the argument is, scholarly arguments are in defining the idea of custodianship and stewardship of data. And that through this, and what we do is to adopt and adapt this idea of custodianship of data through a municipally led approach. Our approach is to say a municipal approach to data management, to data governance is critical across the entire process cycle. We're looking at data creation, crowdsourcing of data, processing data, to dissemination of data, data sharing. All of these aspects are part of the data governance mechanism and the data governance system. So the premise here is to acknowledge that data is being produced at very granular levels, and custodianship of this data therefore needs to be closest to the producers of this data, which is why we've argued in our paper that decentralization becomes integral to the idea of custodianship as well. And so the municipal approach to maintaining stewardship and custodianship of data is central to the city planning labs' framework and our thinking about custodianship of data. I hope that clarifies adequately. And we, through our work with the Singapore Land Authority, we've partnered with them. What we've also learned is through the institutional arrangements building block, there are possibilities for governments to enter many complex kinds of contractual arrangements, memorandum of understanding. So, for example, if Uber has data to share with a city government agency, then the city government would enter an agreement with Uber to ensure there's encrypted data that is being solicited, and that the processing of this data and dissemination of this data is in no way going to threaten competitiveness for Uber against other similar actors. So there's possibilities for many complex contractual arrangements which can actually be conceptualized within the institutional arrangements pillar in order to ensure that there's multiple types of requirements. And as I mentioned earlier, there's actors with many different kinds of values and goals who are involved in the IPDS framework and in the framework of governance of data. So the institutional arrangements pillar here therefore becomes very crucial in enabling custodianship and stewardship of data with governments, agencies, and at the micro level through a municipal approach.
follow-up question on this custodian approach that how do you convince the city government to make open the data and sharing the data? Because most of these client country, like developing country, they are thinking the data as a competing interest of the national security. So how do you make this happen? And also the other question related with that, the human capital. As you know that most of municipal government, even the national government has quite a challenge to get the proper human capital to maintain the data infrastructure, but how you can make that happen in the municipality level. Of course, the capital level might be possible, but secondary city, but since you work on that part, for the Indonesia, could you explain more detail?
Sure, absolutely. Great questions again. So how do we, your first question is about how, sorry, could you?
How do you convince
the municipal governments, right? So it's a very sustained, long-run process. As I mentioned, none of this materialized overnight. City Planning Labs Initiative they've engaged with all the 3 cities in Indonesia, for instance, for over about 7 years. And it's a gradual process of understanding the needs of the cities and responding to them by using the IPDS framework to help cities use the different components as their entry points to embrace data governance. So some cities, for example, could be stronger with respect to passing a local government decree more easily because there's a greater buy-in from the mayor, as opposed to others who might treat a geoportal as an easier entry point, and then they can consolidate their strengths from that. But importantly, in all the 3 cities, Denpasar, Balikpapan, and Semarang, all the 3 cities very clearly emphasize the need for institutional arrangements. Unless you have regulatory derivatives to national spatial data infrastructure as a sphere at the macro level of policy, all 3 cities acknowledge that they would not be able to implement the national government framework at the local government level. So I think, how do you convince cities? There are, the framework itself allows that agility for cities to embrace whatever they can as a starting point, but maintaining institutional arrangements as their foundational strength. The other aspect that I wanted to highlight is in terms of, yes, fully agree with you that it's difficult for municipal governments to then say all of this data is open. So in fact, when you look at our reports which are available online, you'd see that data itself is classified under multiple categories. It's not all data is open data. And one needs to acknowledge that because the city is dealing with a whole range of complex set of data sets. And security is certainly a critical concern of the state. So you have classified data, you have open data, you have restricted data, you have confidential data, you have multiple categories of data sets. And it's through these categorizations that the geoportal can then structure its design to disseminate data in ways that are not, antithetical to the idea of custodianship.
Great, thank you. Maybe, well, if it's a quick question, maybe.
Try to make it very quick.
Yes.
So important about the data silos, data management, integration, and the balance between the local level and national level. So what do you think about a model where, say, there's a national data infrastructure, where depending on the data sets at other levels, provincial or municipal level, that they are basically the custodians, but they are not duplicating each other's data sets, but say contributing. And I know Indonesia has a very good national data policy. Was that link there in the city issue, the 3 city issue we're mentioning? Or were they isolated city information systems? Because then if every city makes its own information system, then you get a lot of diversity, which is sometimes useful, but generally not effective. So I'm a bit of a centralist, I admit. So I would believe in a national infrastructure where local people do the maintenance and also owner of the data and decide what is open and what is not open. It can be privacy, it can be security.
But that's precisely our argument, that there are national spatial data infrastructure regulations which are very strong and clearly established at the national government level in Indonesia. What is absent is a local ecosystem to implement the NSDI, and I explained this right at the beginning of our discussion, that Indonesia has the GRGN, which is their version of the NSDI. What we're recommending, the MSDI, Municipal Spatial Data Infrastructure, is an ecosystem that is a must to implement the NSDI in ways that are locally relevant. And it's here that we're arguing that institutional arrangements become central to this implementation process, because institutional arrangements involve derivative regulations. Without that derivative regulation, cities do not know step by step what kinds of processes to follow to implement the NSDI. And that's what the NSDI is about. What we also highlighted is that when the 3 cities that CPL is working with, when they embraced and adopted the IPDS framework, they also make sure to establish linkages with the NSDI at the national government level. So it's not isolated data sets at all. It's not isolated data repositories. It's very much linked with the national spatial data infrastructure arrangement, institutional arrangements at the national level, and the components there. So our central argument is you need the NSDI to implement the NSDI in meaningful ways at local government levels. Thank you.
Great, so thank you very much. Let's move on. I know we took 10 minutes extra at the beginning, so yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, so next we have Hogun Park. And you'll be presenting on Beyond the Surface.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, feel free to.
Yeah, I will be there.
Yeah.
You know, Arun Reitz, who was head of BMG in
So Hogun is going to tell us about uncovering the complex interplay of intra-urban inequality in developing countries.
So I know that is a bit weird name, but in a simple sense, spatial inequality. So what we see over the time, the spatial inequality has not been fully explored in the city level, because what we see that over the time that the city should be a place for the opportunity for prosperity and income generation and upward mobility. However, over the last 3 decades, what we've seen is it's not happening. Of course, there are so many studies happen for the inequality. Thomas Piketty's work and Seman's work about the upward mobility, but that's not focusing on the intra-urban inequality. That's more on the inequality in general. And in the planning side, policy-wide, that the territorial development or regional level of inequality has been discussed a lot and the implemented policy. However, city level urban inequality has not been fully explored. So my paper that we detailed explain about the literature review on what are the channels to making this happen. So we can easily categorize those into this feature cycle of the economic visual cycle of the urban intra-inequality happen the 3 channels: economic consequences, social consequences, and environmental consequences. So economic consequences, you can easily imagine that the poor people cannot live in the certain area, they are moved out, pushed out, and they're making segregation. This segregation limiting their human capital, limiting their future outcome of the employment and the economic opportunity. And it will make it fortifying that the situation about the urban economic inequality. And social consequences is right here that this will make a generation of the social unrest and tension because of income disparity. And this income disparity also affect on that incentivize poor people to participate in criminal activity. And environmental consequences, which is quite critical at this point, the rising environment or rising climate change. because most of the climate change happen to be, or the most of poor people living in the flood-prone area or climate-prone area, which is critical for their vulnerable livelihoods. And also, many of our intervention or city planning policy mostly focused on the well-off area. So we can see kind of eco gentrification. So this makes them fortifying the issue of the urban intra-inequality in the city. To better understand this urban intra-inequality, we compiled the data which called the GMD, Global Monitoring Database, which now publicly open in our DDH in the internet site of the World Bank. So we compiled the poverty data household survey around 376 observation from the 100 cities in the 61 country, which help us to understand that the spatial inequality in the city level worldwide. So generally, the simple word that we calculate the income per each city to generate the Gini index. In case of La, yeah. So this data show, of course, this is not the analysis, but data speculation, but it shows a quite interesting pattern, U-shape. So here you can see the U-shape in the end when the population large city, especially for the developing country, has a large disparity or large spatial inequality, which named as Cape Town, Johannesburg, Mexico City, and Rio de Janeiro and Bogota, which is well known for the spatial segregation. So you now understand why we are using this data to understand how the intra-inequality has been happening in the worldwide. And this data also gives us some quite good understanding about the overall the inequality, how things has been happened by using the two time series between the 2000 before 2013 and after 2013. We can easily see that it's well aligned with the current academic saying the intra-inequality has been decreased. So as you can see here that our bar chart showing the Gini coefficient has been decreased over the time, not over the time, but two time period, except EAP. But EAP is the programmatic of the survey sample, but other than that, the whole country across showing that the decreasing pattern of the Gini. And quite interestingly, once we go deeper into the certain region, especially lab, we have more data compared to other regions. That's why you can delve into the detail to see that how city has been better over the time. From 2000 to until 2018, their spatial inequality has been better. So inequality has been addressed over the time.
So it's going better, or is this meaning it's getting worse?
Going better. So the Gini coefficient going better. Yeah.
Okay, good.
And quite interestingly, of course, this is data speculation, not any regression. But once we compare to that complexity needs, which is down below x-axis showing the company's PPR, how complexity is. So it's quite interesting to show, but there is not much change. But here, the most poor city has more the disparity or inequality happening. So we can say somehow the city morphology may affect on that inequality has some relationship as well. But this will not tell all the story, because if the income or spatial inequality has been better, the municipal services should be better, and other linkage also should be better over the time. However, what you see here is not that. So we also compare to the access to piped water as a proxy of their services, but services has not been improved at all. So even though the income disparity has been better over the time, however, the channel of the disparity or inequality as a three, not only for the economic consequences, environmental consequences, and social consequences, which are related with their welfare and amenity. So this has not been explored yet, so that's why we need to get into more detailed analysis to understand what's going on into the city level. So that's why since our session is data, so I try to introduce some of the data set that we explore to use for the city level assessment and the prioritization of the investment, because the first half of our research is showing that global trend, the disparity has not been static. However, to make a better investment for the city as a World Bank side, we need to understand where we need to prioritize. So here is one of the showcase is Amman. Amman has been grown over time quite a lot. From 2009 or from 1990 to 2015 or 2020, the population growth has been about 221%, which is almost double within the 2 decades, which will give you idea about how the municipal service is limited and challenging population. And also in the meantime, the crisis happened, so many people are moving here because of Syrian refugee, and right now about the 88% of the total population is refugee, which making a competing interest between the original population and the refugee, which ultimately affect on the city finance, the limited public services, and making this vicious circle of the disparity. So what we do? So first thing first, using the census data. Using census data is basic data to understand what's happening. So about that, where the low-income households are living in, what is the situation of the job and employment to understand. However, this is only one dimension. So that's why we use the cell phone data to understand. Because in our very first slide, we talk about economic consequences. The most likely economic segregation affect on that they're limiting their job opportunity because of job opportunity. And using this cell phone data, we identify that the commuting distance is quite different by neighborhood. So bottom 10% of the income distribution of the neighborhood, the commuting distance is 4 kilometers. Otherwise, the 10% upper income, they only commute like 2 kilometers. So of course, the 2 kilometers is not really far, but comparing the size of the Amman, this is a lot, and the cost a lot. Because the public transit in Amman is quite expensive, they are very limited public transit. So they usually take a taxi or microbuses, which cost a lot compared to the public transit. The other thing that we also look into is amenity. And as you've seen here, the amenity is disproportionately attributed. And in case of educational facility, 20% of people outskirts were far away from the education facility. So, and also in terms of healthcare facility, around 30% of people are outskirts, whereas far reaching to the healthcare facility. And park and public space, obvious that those park and public space only are located in the affluent neighborhood, which is making more vicious circle for the environmental consequences and social consequences of how this will be happen as well. And in terms of refugee area, we also adopt the remote sensing, try to understand that where our refugees are located, particularly because there is no such a public data available to see that where our refugee people are located. So instead of using the census data or household survey, because there is no such things, that we use the remote sensing data, tracking down the morphology. So here you can see that the urban morphology, especially the building morphology. So you can see that the former building is rectangular and the good shape. However, most likely this refugee area or the informal housing are not rectangular shape. It's more the weird shape. So which we can identify that the house based on their the size, density, and gate shape. And over the time, we identify that there are 150,000 of the buildings in Amman, and we can see 5% of them are classified as lower quality. So this is quite interesting because that people only think this blue area has been recognized the refugee area, but this refugee area or slum area or informal housing has been keep expanding. It's showing that the huge segregation in the city. And the west side, there's none of this. eastern side, there are so many things. However, city government has not been aware about this. This idea about analytics can give them an idea about how we can approach for address the disparity. So let's wrap up that story. Intra-urban inequality is huge, and as is shown in that our first chart on the growing disparity over the time and the size of population, especially for the developing country, are facing the issue of this inequality. And there are so many different mechanisms inside. So once we only see that economic outcome, we cannot really explore the details. So that's why we need to bring all the data to see the underlying consequences. Here we show that the commuting and amenity and the huge shock from the outside in the refugee area. This is only three snapshots of the three snapshot and the idea for the understand the social disparity and inequality in Amman. Of course, for other cities, this methodology should be tailored to their needs. However, I believe the innovation of the data and methodology is critical to understand the spatial inequality for the future. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to answer any question.
Thank you. So we can take maybe 5 minutes of questions. Any questions?
Thanks, Ogan. In the first part of your presentation, can you talk a bit about how you define the aerial units, spatial units of where you can define spatial inequality? Because in some of the pictures that you showed early on, you have developing neighborhoods and poor neighborhoods right next to each other.
Yep.
Depending on how the boundaries of the unit are drawn. Either those could be seen as two separate neighborhoods with a lot of inequality, or one that's mixed income. So yeah.
So since GMD survey data have a geocoordinates, we compile those into GHS UCDB, the GHS or the urban center database, and the degree of urbanization, which is classified the urban area, and we just put this household survey data. Since the Gini coefficient is calculating the differences, so we fold the household survey is top up with this GHSL as the spatial unit.
But just within the city, what is the comparison? Is it just
Household income per capita?
It's not like.
Yeah, it's not this is obligated to the neighborhood or special district, because there is not much sample that we can distribute the entire city and distinct the different neighborhoods, because as you know, the household survey is a household survey. It's a sample. It's not and cover the entire city, so it's quite hard to tell whether those are classified those in the affluent neighborhood or the poor neighborhood per se.
Thank you. This was really a pleasure to look at all the analysis you've done, and I'm familiar with some of your work as well. Thank you for your presentation. I was curious to know a little bit more about the methodologies you've employed to deal with the constant nature of uncertainties and precarity that one sees in the context of Amman. If you could please elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, there are so many uncertainty for each data.
That's right.
Yeah, in terms of cell phone data, the people start to turn off the geocoded, and that was quite disaster for the researcher. So even I turn off the geocoding for Google Maps. So there is quite a bit uncertainty on that. But in terms of other uncertainty of the methodological wise, that the remote sensing data itself also not 100%.
Sure.
So even though we claim that 150,000 buildings are there and 5% of the buildings are informal, but I can say, even though I put that as a 93% of the kappa coefficient of the accuracy, however, remote sensing is only 80% of the science.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that what I give you here is the morphology is only one dimension, because in the housing per se, the housing shape is not the housing shape determine that where are these low quality buildings located, but it doesn't include that density. Because each household unit, we don't exactly know how many people are in.
Mhm.
But in our the perception that most likely the refugee people are the renters that they squeeze inside. So we are not sure about that as well. So this is a kind of uncertainty that we need to keep aware about it. But at least my point of view, we can point out that where we need to prioritize investments. So that's the kind of critical first step that we are looking for.
Thank you.
But I take your point that for the next step, we need to address those uncertainty for the.
We'll also think about it from our
Yeah.
side.
Maybe one more question?
I would.
Yeah.
Question, for a given country, are you able to look at how the change in inequality may be different in large cities versus, medium-sized cities? And also, across cities, what happens in terms of, variance of incomes? And maybe a related point on this, how do you account for the different cost of living actually? Just look at the incomes. Inequality in one city may be different from inequality in another city because
So that's why we use the inequality as Gini coefficient is a kind of relative term between the cities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the city, it's fine. If you do across cities, maybe it's.
Yes, and that's why that we also compile those into the two buckets because of lack of data. So unfortunately, even though I claim that we put the 100 city, but frankly speaking, this 100 city have a whole data point. The two data points before 2013 and the two data points after 2013. So there are very limited understanding on how this has been changed over the time. Of course, to account that we normalize the dollar value, or at least the income. So this give us that idea about this decreasing pattern. However, the living cost can be different time to time, which has not been addressed in here. So we only use or discount rate of the GDP, PPP adjusted ratio that we use. However, those are kind of missing part that we need to explore a little bit further. Last question.
If allowed by the chair.
Yeah, go for it.
You focused a bit in your presentation on the developing countries and the cities. But I think the spatial inequality is also in developed countries.
Yeah.
So the banlieue in Paris are very famous, and I think many big cities also have this issue where it's very disturbing, especially when it's getting worse in the future. Did you also have in the U curve, say, also cities from the developed countries?
We haven't looked at it yet, but I assume that may be happen because of the case of the Detroit, where since the population is still large and the disparity has been keep persistent in US, so we may look into it. However, the reason I put more on the developing country because of lack of the data. In case of US, they do have a bunch of the ACS, American Community Survey, and the census data, which we can refer that the spatial inequality quite easily.
Should be easier.
Yeah. But right now, I'm showing that kind of alternative data sources to how we can understand the decode and the consequences.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Okay, next we have Thomas Esch. Is that right? Yeah, sure. Right, and Thomas is going to talk to us about pixels to policy, decoding urban morphology and policy influences.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah, so kind welcome also from my side to this session, and it's a great pleasure now to present you some, I would say, first findings and outcomes of a joint research between the German Aerospace Center and the World Bank, several colleagues. So also Hogan is involved from the World Bank side, and Nancy Garcia and Olivia Roost. And from the DLR side, it's my colleague Daniela Velasquez Lopez and myself. So the idea is that we wanted to check if we can use our remote sensing data from DLR, which focuses, for instance, on the description of the urban morphology. And if you can link this data to information on the policy restrictions or urban planning system in cities, and if there is a link or not. So as I said, we are still working on that. So what you will see now are first, I would say, observations, but of course we cannot yet say if this is a clear pattern or not. But I'm very happy to have a discussion afterwards with you about that. So the motivation, of course, at the first glance is that urbanization is an increasingly global phenomenon, and with more people residing in cities than ever before. And we all know that, of course, the urban policy and planning play a key role in kind of having an influence on the path of the global urbanization. So planning system regulations strongly influence the form of a city. Also the structuring within the city, so polycentricity, monocentricity, but also inequalities, as we learned. And also, of course, it has a strong influence on the operations of cities. So with our study, we particularly wanted to focus on the, let's say, physical aspects, so the form and in particular the urban morphology, so the 3D shape distribution. And so our hypothesis is that the analysis of urban morphology and density can, on the one hand, provide valuable insights, let's say, into the needs, the effectiveness, and the impact of planning and policy. And thus, if this hopefully is true, then also, of course, it can help increase the urban resilience and also sustainability. Because if we discover certain patterns, it might be in where planning or policy might take some actions. So, of course, there are already a lot of metrics, parameters that are used to analyze urban morphology. For instance, you might know it's the build-up density is often used, the population density, but also the land use mix or transportation efficiency. However, also in literature, you find that actually to have a complete and comprehensive, let's say, look at this aspect, you actually have to include also the third dimension, let's say, of the built environment. So let's say the height, the volume, or also the floor space or floor area in this assessment. And this is often not yet the case. And that's where we saw and still see an opportunity. Just to give you an example, in the lower graph, you see that in this blue bars, you see the population density in 2D. So it's just referred to the build-up area. And you see a certain pattern if you look at the macro regions, of the Verbeek macro regions. So if you have the ranking, you see that South Asia has the highest average population per urban clusters, I have to say. So here we look at this urban cluster database and the average, let's say, was 100,000. And then we see a ranking. If we now look at this population per floor area for the same clusters, you can actually discover that already the ranking is a bit different. So the pattern changes, and this also, let's say, is visible in our remote sensing data that you can see here. So on the left-hand side, we derive from this remote sensing technologies the building fraction in these examples on the top left for Tokyo, on the lower left for New York. And of course, the more reddish you see, it means the higher is the fraction of buildings within one, in this case, 90 by 90 meter cells. On the right-hand side, we have same area, but now we also take into consideration the height. So it's the volume that you see there. So it's the, let's say, product of the build-up area multiplied by the height that we observed. And there you see that already the spatial pattern varies a lot. And that's exactly also, which I think gives a nice indication that it's actually more accurate, and it's important to also consider the height and not just 2D domain of a city. And that's, as I said, the baseline for our research. So what we are using is one of our latest data sets at DLR, which is the World Central Footprint 3D. It's a global map at 90-meter resolution that was derived from a 12-meter height model, which is globally available. It's the so-called World Dam, as you see on the left-hand side. So it's an example from Dar es Salaam. And we have a specific algorithm that analyzes the, let's say, the local height differences within the city boundaries that we also have from one of our settlement masks, and then assume that each significant height difference is actually related within the urban area to a difference in to the building heights, let's say. So the difference between the ground and the top of the building. We also have, of course, several mechanisms to first separate or exclude trees or vegetation, because they also have a height, and we don't want to consider that. And what we finally get, you see on the lower left, is then, as I said, on a 90-meter basis, a pixel or a pixel a height. And then if you have also the area estimated, we can go for volume. So with data set allows us then to actually go for arbitrary spatial analysis. And here's an example also of another work that had been presented yesterday by our colleague Remy Edward. So there you can take, for instance, the macro regions and derive statistics. Here's a histogram on the top line. For instance, what's the average height and height distribution within the macro region? You can do this for countries in the center of this graph, or even for cities, or even within quarters. So that's, I think, a very nice database, and that's why we thought, let's look, or take this database and look at the very local level, so at urban clusters, and see how the heights within the city are distributed, and also if there is any correlation to the planning system. So just to give you an impression, of course, 90 meters is not super precise. Actually, you might wonder, I said that the original DEM is 12 meters. But unfortunately, due to German security regulations, we were not allowed to open and freely publish this 12-meter data. So we have to artificially aggregate it to 90 meters. But anyway, this example on unit shows you if you combine, for instance, these heights with building outlines from OSM or from Google or from Microsoft when you get it, and it still gives you a very nice impression of the building pattern. Of course, still the color indicates the height. So blue would mean it's 1 to 2 stories. Red would mean in this case it's around 14 meters high. It's just the average, let's say, in the vicinity, but still it aligns very well and is in correlation very well with the real structure. So this example here, the bluish, would mean that you have 1 to 2 story buildings and very small footprints. So usually these are the residential areas, whereas in inner city you see you have larger building footprints and also greater heights. So what we did now in the first step was to integrate 3 kinds of data sets. The first one was the WSF 3D that I just introduced to you, and this gives you different parameters. So we have the build-up area, the build-up height, and the volume. Then to come up with the information on the planning regulations, the planning system, we used the city-level policy surveys from the Atlas of Urban Expansion. And then finally, the analysis was focused, let's say, spatially based on the urban center database from JRC. So you see this in that. So the yellow outline is actually the outline of the urban clusters as they are provided by the urban clusters database. Within that, we analyze our, in this example here, the volume distribution, and then 3D visualization then shows you that you get a very nice impression of the distribution of volumes or heights or the build-up area, so the build-up fraction. So far, we have looked at 168 cities with populations greater than 200,000 in 2015, but in the future, we plan to expand this to more cities and also to more up-to-date data. So here's an example. So some first findings. So this is Paris. What we also include in this analysis is that we try to automatically identify the city center based on the growth over the last years, but also the distribution of the build-up volume. And if this is done, also an automated algorithm generates like rings of 1 kilometer, 2 kilometer distance. You can define this by yourself, and even sectors. And of course, with our data, you can then have the average height, the average volume for each of these sectors, and you can then start describing distributions of the 3D shape. In this example on the lower left, you see it's a height plot for different cities. So on the left, it's in the gray color, it's Accra. Then we have Lagos in the yellow color, in the blue color, it's Mexico City, and in the green color, it's Paris. And already there you see from the distribution from the inner ring on the left, so that is the city center, to the outer rings, we have the average height, that there is a clear pattern usually, and this is true. I can tell you that the richer the city is, the more prosperous, the higher are the heights in the center, and the stronger the ratio is between the height decrease from center to the outer part. A few years ago, there was a nice report also here at World Bank called Pyramid and Pancakes that also referred to this actually, like if you have more richer cities, you have this pyramid shape, and if you have a pancake, it's usually a sign that it's a less prosperous city. Also, in this other study that I referred to already, we did this already at the global scale for countries and for the macro regions, and also there we see here that in different colors, and there is actually a clear pattern between the income of country and then the distribution of volume per capita, for instance. And this is, I think, very interesting information and new information. And of course, you can imagine that you can combine this with all kinds of statistics if you have it in. So now some first findings. So we said it's rather a correlation at the moment, so we haven't had time now to go really into depth into the analysis, but just to show you some first outcomes. So on the left-hand side in this figure, you see that's the zoning and the land use presence in relation to the total build-up area and build-up volume. And the interesting thing is that both, also on the right-hand side, we have the zoning and land use compliance in the private sector in compared for build-up area to build-up volume, that there is actually a tendency. So just in this example, we see that if there is always zoning and land use compliance in the private sector, we see that actually there is the highest, let's say, attenuation of the build-up, so the preference of the build-up volume. So there are more volumes than you see if you have sometimes implementation. It's already less, so less tendency to the volume. And then there's more kind of the dominance of the total build-up area. So not the highest anymore if there's never any kind of such a regulation. And a bit the same trend we see if the zoning and land use presence. The forcing of it. Again, this domain here, a very generalized finding is that if you have the responsibility of the planning for a new development, you can see that actually the average build-up height is significantly higher if it's on the municipal or governmental agency side. If this is mixed or right, it's a bit less. And in the private developers, we see that actually there's a least tendency to go into height. Also with the urban containment policy here, actually, this is not a clear picture at the moment. So we see that at first glance, there's not such a big difference. So we have to check if this is what the reasons are for this. But basically, considering this, we can say that the municipal authorities play or seem to play a pivotal role in ensuring the dense and efficient urban development. And also, of course, the analysis reveals that the ineffectiveness of the urban containment policies in promoting efficient land use might exist. That's why on the right-hand side, you see there's not really a big difference. Actually, one might expect a larger impact. And again, this is a bit more also looking into future. And as I said already, you can combine this kind of three-dimensional data with all kinds of information. Here was an analysis that we started and we put it into relation with the street pattern, so the primary roads extracted from OpenStreetMap. And again, one can see that actually in higher income countries, you see that there's more streets per cluster, let's say. And on the other hand, or per volume also. And in the, let's say, the lower the income is, you can see that there's a higher density, that you have less streets per volume. And this might be quite interesting, for instance, if you talk about mobility and the traffic system. So in theory, it could mean that you have more streets per inhabitant or per volume in the richer cities. So that might be better, more favorable for a transportation system. Whereas in the other case, where you have, let's say, less streets per building volume, that you are not so well equipped, let's say, with streets, and that could be a first indicator that you might run into traffic problems. Again, this is just the first idea, and this is something that we now want to systematically investigate for various cities and more in detail. So here, as I said, it's just one average per cluster. Of course, as I showed earlier, we can really do this even on the quarter level for the cities. Yes, so now let's go into the discussion. So looking at the verticality of urban development, we can see that I think it's clear incorporating the vertical dimension enhances the urban planning and research. Traditionally, of course, urban form assessments focus on the horizontal spatial arrangements mainly, so the 2D. But I think with the first outcomes and findings, and also from other research, we see that introducing the vertical domain is really, let's say, promoting a more comprehensive understanding of the urban morphology and also, of course, of urban density and related developments. So the vertical indicators like building height and floor area ratio offer insight into land use intensity, population density, urban development efficiency. Also considering the vertical domain or dimensions allows for nuanced analysis of urban density patterns, infrastructure provision, and the relationship between built form and environmental sustainability. Also, let's say looking at the impact of policies, urban form, and here also the street pattern as an example, of course, play a role. So planning policies significantly shape actually the physical form of urban spaces. Also, examination of zoning regulations, land use plans, and compliance levels shows how political influence or policies influence the build-up volume, the height, and also the development patterns. And of course, effective planning strategies are crucial for sculpting actually urban morphology. And then there's a preliminary resume before we can go into the discussion. If you look at the institutional roles and policy effectiveness, with the first indication that we have, we see that the municipal authorities are key actually to ensuring dense and efficient urban development. Also, proper land use plans and zoning seems to promote efficient land use, efficient in terms of more compact settlements. Also, in other studies that we started now, we see, of course, it's too dense, you run into crowding. So then we see that we have extreme populations, population numbers per volume, and that's actually something that you might not want to have, especially also in the COVID case. We saw this, it's very dense, there's a higher contagion risk. And then let's say the urban containment policies have limitations in improving vertical layering within the urban areas. That might be one of the findings if we go more into depth, if this is let's say confirmed what we saw in this one plot that I explained. But also the policy refinement is needed to better align, let's say, with the objectives of efficient land use. So with that, I'm done with my slide. I'm very happy to have a discussion with you. Thank you.
Hey, do you have any questions? I have a quick question. So the data that this WSF is for a cross section in time. Like, are you able to build?
That's good because this is based on this tandem X height model and it was collected in 2012. So the height estimations from 2012 actually. There is an update for 2019 now. And we also wanted to use this or still want to use it. The challenge is a bit that technically, because the primary goal of this mission is to come up with a digital elevation model. And they improved a lot in some areas where you have a lot of terrain. So what we see now is we have changes due to buildings, but also due to better estimation of the real terrain. Right. And so now we first have to find an algorithm to eliminate this improvement of the terrain and just to find those changes which originate from buildings. Right. And this might take time, but with that, we have at least a chance to have an update from 12 to 19. And now, since you asked, also one idea that we have is because in future, we cannot assume that there will always be on a regular basis global DMs. So one idea is to train machine learning or deep learning models that directly estimate the height from satellite imagery, like combination of Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2, for instance, where you can then frequently go for updates and check what the height is. There are some promising approaches, but also, as we had with our approach in the first steps, the challenges, be very high heights, usually it separates. So up to 3-4 floors, it works well, but the higher buildings are underestimated.
Okay. Harris?
The question I asked you several years ago, and maybe the answer has changed. So I'm just wondering, the precision of the measure of the heights, has it improved with the new data or?
Yes, so actually I was here 2 years ago at the World Bank for a research day, and in that case with Remy Effert, the corporation, he came up with this Antaurus data set. And because, as I mentioned, in the first version of our WSF3D purely from the radar, we had problems with estimating properly the heights of the very high buildings. There's this Antaurus database, which is kind of a private point data set, where a company collects the height of every new high building that is built globally. And we integrated this in our database. So we put these points with the known the height, and then we could increase our average height that we estimated. And that, I mean, percentage-wise, I think it was just 3% of the total pixel area. But especially if you go to the key zones, like in Manhattan, in New York, you would see that we massively improved. So before, our average estimation error of the height was, so in average, 3 meters. And now we came down to normally at least 22 centimeters. So in average, of course, if you take it per pixel, you still have between 3 and 4 meters, so on 1 floor.
My question is what I'm interested in is more like the small heights, informal settlements, building 1-story buildings, and only something like 2-story buildings. Is it something you can
No, I would say no. Unfortunately, not with that method, at least not. I mean, technically, again, in our case here, our primary goal was to come up with a global data set. Because if you go on the city level, there are enough very good height models also from remote sensing that you can generate. And with that, you could easily do this, but not, let's say, with the globally available data.
What satellite data did you use for the dense So for me, the model.
Tandem X. So it's Tandem X, it's the name, it's WorldDem. It's meanwhile, I mean, because DLR was running this mission, so we had a direct access to it. Meanwhile, there is the European Commission bought also a version and brought out at the 30-meter resolution, which is a bit insane because in Germany, I'm not allowed to use the higher resolution than 90 meter, but at the European level, you can get it for free for 30 meters.
And you mentioned Sentinel-1 and 2.
Yeah, we use this to extract the masks. So where's the sediment itself? So the DEM is just used to estimate the heights within the sediment area, but the sediment area itself we use from our World Sediment Footprint 2019, which is a binary mask build up non-build up.
I had a question on the relationship between the affluence of a city and outward and upward and outward growth. Would the relationship be the same for cities that are polycentric? For instance, Bangalore, where I live, is a polycentric city, where we have a nascent idea of a central business district that exists in the heart of the city, but actually the real economic growth nodes are in the peri-urban areas.
That's actually something that we actually want to address, but haven't yet, and that is one of the reasons why we have these sectors, as you saw it. So at the moment, it's just one average from centering to outering, but of course, the next step that we also had in mind was to analyze based on the distribution in the sectors. Do we have separate centers and how are they related to each other and what are their heights?
Sure.
This is coming up, but not yet.
I look forward to
Thanks
it.
for the idea.
Thank you.
Have you calculated floor areas based on the building volumes? Because it seems like the example that you were showing of where you combine the volumes with the building footprints. If you do that, even if you just divide by 3 meters or something, you can get total floor area, which would be very useful. You can be able to put that data for some analysis that we're doing a talk of energy efficiency. And we struggle with it because if there are various data sets that are quite different from each other, the coverage is different, the estimates of the actual block building floor areas and stuff. So it seems like we can do it quite easily with this. So
yes, we have the reason, but the reason was, as you said already, like actually you just would have to divide by 3 the height, and then it's floor area. So that's at least we thought that's something that the user can do. But I mean, if this is for us, it's not a problem to provide such a data set as well. Yeah.
But have the volumes been kind of combined with the building footprints?
Not global, no. We estimate, I mean, we have this, the fraction is a 10-meter resolution if you want, even, and then we can have this average height, so we could do it at a more precise level. Also, of course, we have done it in several regional studies by using footprints, but at that time, at least, so it's 3 years ago, there was not a global building footprint data set available. Still yet, it's not, but as soon as possible, and this is complete, we can, of course, do exactly this thing and use the building footprint plus estimated height and come up with a, I think, wide precise estimation of the floor area.
Great, thank you. Okay, next we have Bernice Bonds. She will present to us on new research avenues on urban expansion and land commodification in the global south.
It is. Yeah, in terms of your touch, that in terms of your question, another issue is the building material. Most of the slums are made by not by the bricks. So which also affect on the building or certain
measure depends on
measure depending on the building material as well, because it is measured by the later.
But the two-story ones are nice. They look nice. They're like
But like
some of them are very nice. But yeah, okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, we will. Let's use this summer.
This summer.
Yeah. And which paper? I mean, we have 2 papers.
The land use conversion and the one with shut down. Jennifer, I'm not worried about this one.
Yeah, land use speaking.
It's more, can
Yeah.
sedate.
Where is? So you said like they also the world. The university provided and
Just checking how. Yes, I think the international. Yeah, I think.
Sorry, I need a USB key.
Oh,
Sorry. Come back. Sorry.
I have a USB.
But it's
They were just being shared.
that is very.
Yes. Sorry.
All right, it looks like we've got over our technical difficulties. Back on track.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so Bernice,
Yes.
you'll have
Sorry for this 4 minutes of technical issues. So good morning. I'm Bérénice Bon. I'm a French geographer, as you can hear from my accent. Sorry for that. So thank you very much for the invitation. And well, I'm very happy to be here. It's a wonderful opportunity to discuss this report we published last year. So this work was funded by the Technical Committee on Land and Development of the French Cooperation. And we analyzed the changes of land uses in the rural urban peripheries of 9 cities in Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Cities experiencing a very rapid spatial growth. So since Monday within this conference and this morning in this session, when we discuss urbanization dynamics and urban sprawl, we consider the city as a built morphology, infrastructure, access to services, and so on. And I will show that this is not enough to be able to anticipate future urban developments, to advise on political regulations, to measure inequalities, and to prevent conflicts. For that, I'm going to take you on a journey on unknown lands, less studied dynamics of urbanization. Oops. Yes. And it's a session on data, but I will go on the ground. Sorry for that. So we are here about 50 kilometers from Nairobi, the capital of Kenya, in the area of the blue small square that you can see on the map. So at the distance from the built-up layer represented in gray on the map and based on satellite imagery. This piece of land was bought by a Kenyan woman who lives in London. She had this for 4 years, but she has not started building on it. She has just invested in a ditch in the ground to mark the limits of her property. I took this photograph in the same locality, represented again by the small blue square on the map. This land was bought in 2019 by a savings and cooperative based in Nairobi. This kind of cooperative centralized savings of members every month. So for instance, if you have $100, we put like $2 agreement on the same bank account. And then this kind of cooperative offers loans and investment proposals. So you can see barbed wires and small access roads. So this cooperative has available liquidity. They subdivided the land into 70 small plots, very small, less than 150 square meters. And all these plots have been sold. But again, nothing has been built for the past 5 years. This is my last photograph, still in this little blue square. This plot was bought in 2018 by a group of 14 individuals who work in small businesses in Nairobi. They are still sending around $50 each month to a common bank account. So they pool their savings monthly. As you can see, they just put pieces of wood to mark the property. So why is these 3 photographs? I wanted to attract your attention to a massive common phenomenon, and of course, not restricted to Kenya, that is going on in the periphery of urban agglomerations today. And this is intense land transactions who do not result in constructions on the plots, so artificialization of the land. Land is subdivided into small plots and left fallow. You can see this massive process of land subdivisions without developments on this cadastral map on the left, 30 kilometers from Nairobi. These lands have been sold mostly by Maasai families 8 years ago. In this locality, so the land is privately owned. They all have individual titles. This process of land commodification, land subdivision, land hoarding without developments is overlooked in debates on the dynamics of urbanization and underestimated. The current quantitative estimation of urban areas all over the world through satellite imagery are only based on the built-up area. These land markets with no construction in urban peripheries are not insignificant. They often take out land from agricultural or pastoral uses. You can see on the right satellite images of Bahu, a village in South India, close to a city called Pondicherry. From 2003 to 2016, a large area of fertile land has been subdivided into micro plots and again left fallow. You can see the decrease of green areas. And also public statistics barely capture these processes. So our research objectives are 1, to precise and analyze the trajectories, motivations of the involved individuals and to avoid the generic terms we find in academia like investors, buyers, purchasers, and the worst one, speculators. 2, to get quantitative measures on this phenomenon, so the surface area, financial volumes, and economic categorizations. So we work with quantitative methods. So we use land title databases with partnership with local municipalities and land registries. We do web scraping of plot prices. We do also spatial analysis, but spatial analysis of just the subdivision of land, not the built-up area. But today, I will just focus on the empirical data. So in our methodology, we want to grasp all the steps of the land commodification process. Downstream, the first sales, and then acquisition, subdivision of land, and upstream, the sale, resales of land plots. In academia, most of the studies focus on one part of land transactions, mostly the sales by the original landholders. But at each step, some individuals produce and extract value. And these individuals have diverse financial and political resources and economic motivations. So if we look at the first step, we ask, who are the original landholders, why are they selling or subdividing their land, where is the money from the sales reinvested, and how are the ownership rights transferred. We show that selling factors are often linked to inheritance, the decrease of incomes from agricultural production, the issue of water, and more intense climate variabilities and access and the need of money for accessing education. And sales revenue is often reinvested in urban commercial businesses. So it's also produce, urban space. It's just this flows of money. Then if you look at the second step, we specify the buyer's sociology. Those who purchase and undertake the subdivision of land into small plots. For that, we analyze the origin of the capital of these land buyers, from where the money comes from. And it's quite diverse. The capital, so when they buy land, their money comes from commercial businesses, urban employment, their savings, or access to credit, that in a very broad sense, not only from commercial banks, you access credit to church associations, interpersonal networks, savings, or credit cooperatives. And people can gain access to land individually, or a very important phenomenon, by pooling their resources. For example, I just have $500, you have $600, we pool our resources, we buy a very small plot, 30 kilometers from Nairobi, because as an individual, I cannot access land. Yes, and so they save and buy collectively, and then they access land collectively, but then they individualize their property by subdividing the land. So the last step, what is done with the land? Some people directly invest on their plots. So they drill, they cultivate, they dig a borehole and save water, they extract the rocks, and then they send it. Or this phenomenon, less visible, the plots are left undeveloped. There is no direct economic valorization on the plot, but the money doesn't lie dormant. What matters is the exchange value of the property title. The plot is used to secure and stock money to protect against inflation. In Nairobi, people don't save money in a bank account, but they buy a plot somewhere. The plots are resold to generate capital gains. The title deeds are used as a social insurance. They can be pledged, for example, to pay hospital bills. In Nairobi, that's the case in many cities, you always have a debt officer in any hospital, because you put your property title, you give your property title, and you have 9 months to pay your hospital bill. The land is sold to generate funds for a wedding or to finance child education. The land is used to ward off economic fluctuations and to support commercial activities. And land financialization is increasing. The titles are mortgaged to get access to credit, to be reinvested in diverse economic activities. And so people are in the process of land accumulation. So owning the land supports various economic functions, not only to build a house, and land acts today like a currency. So, and there is also a common shared anticipation, speculative expectations of all these individuals about the future of these urban areas and the constant increase of land values. But there are no guarantees. It's a big financial risk. So 2 last examples on the ground. On the left, you can see a project on the outskirts of Pondicherry in southern India. This agricultural land was directly subdivided by the owner farmer, who then sold the plots. On the right, the VIP city involves a local businessman in his 40s. He reinvested money from his businesses into a small land company. He directly negotiated with farmers to buy their land, and nothing has been built for 10 years. These plots have been sold. They are, again, very tiny, 120 square meters. And you have a very strong disparity between the first buyers of the land, so the case of this local businessman, for instance, who have the capacity to pool resources, and those who downstream buy one plot. Some of them have very little income. Some of them are poor. I took this photograph on the outskirts of Kitengela. We discussed about it yesterday, a small town at 40 kilometers from Nairobi. It's my last slide. The owner is in the car business in Nairobi, on the left. This guy bought this land in 2012. During the COVID, he faced a significant drop in his income. In 2020, so 4 years ago, he decided to subdivide half of his land into about 20 plots to inject liquidity back into his business. And he kept 20 plots as security in case of any economic shocks or economic fluctuations. Only 2 buyers have started constructions. So two families basically who bought plots. One is a family from Nairobi. The structure of their house is currently temporary due to lack of available funds. The other one is under construction by a lady, a Kenyan lawyer living in Qatar. So again, very diverse socioeconomic profiles of people who buy plots. On the right, this is a project in the same locality of an entrepreneur who lives in Nairobi. He's in his 50s. So he was first employed in an auditing firm in Nairobi. In the late 90s, he bought 2 small plots that he sold to his sister and 1 colleague. He reinvested the money in an area which would benefit 6 months later from the government's announcement of a new expressway. So he decided to sell his land and moved his acquisitions to the outskirts of this small town, anticipating a very high demand. But at this time, it was completely empty land, semi-arid land owned by Masai. He is now in a process of land accumulation in this area. So last year, the family shares their financial difficulties with me because their property titles are now mortgaged in a Kenyan commercial bank, but they struggle to repay the loans because the demand for the plots have decreased because there's a very high inflation in Nairobi these days, and we are still feeling the COVID impacts. So the demand is low for these plots. This person was right. So they bought this land, you can see on the right, in 2007. So they subdivided it in 80 plots. And the plot buyers, mainly from the Kenyan diaspora, here in the United States. And again, this member of this diaspora, they bought the plots through one savings and credit cooperative. So you have also this very important, again, phenomenon of pooling resources, pooling savings to access land. So I would like to conclude on the planning and regulatory tools. First, this process of land division, often so left fallow for sometimes many years, can be a shared marker for detecting and anticipating a change linked to urbanization dynamics. These fallow lands are already integrated into urban economies. Second, planning and zoning measures are ineffective if they take no account of stakeholders' needs, specifically this question of financial inclusion, land value as a form of insurance, and land to stock and build capital. Public policies do not examine socioeconomic conditions that facilitate or encourage these land markets. Third, the increasing intertwining of agricultural and urban uses. So you have abundant liquidity in urban production and often heavily indebted agricultural sector impacted by climate change. And regarding the environmental question of this nexus we are discussing in this conference between land and climate, rights to land are often superimposed on those ecosystem resources. So you have like cumulative rights of access to land, but also, for instance, extraction of water, sand, rocks, and so on. For example, I'm following some investors from Nairobi who just buy plots of land in the periphery to dig boreholes and to sell water. So yes, so here I discuss all the economic, monetary value of land, but what about the ecological value of this fallow land? So a shared social, environmental, and territorial ambition is necessary, with also participatory mechanisms open to all economic actors. So all these individuals along this chain of value, not always the original landholders, but also the economic actors upstream this chain of value. Yeah, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Do we have any questions?
Thank you, super interesting. We've been studying those things, as well. We also went to the field. We didn't go into all the details that you have regarding the all the the actors, the strategies, etc. Because our focus was slightly different on just documenting the land conversion process, over the area. But one question I have is you talked a little bit about the sellers, the customary landowners who sell the land, who are not doing agriculture anymore. Do you have a little more to say about the phenomenon of distress sales? How many people, what are the bargaining power differences between the buyers and the sellers? And also when you talk about all the stakeholders in throughout the the land delivery process, land delivery channel, other people have called it as well. How many of those are superfluous? I mean, like rent seekers, extracting money from others, the role of surveyors, capturing a lot of the rent to their profits at the expense actually of the initial owners, those type of social issues that may emerge. I think that they're super important. How much of it is a source of social instability in society? So did you encounter some of those problematic aspects of the land conversion process in your work?
Thank you very much for your two questions, or two big research questions. So the second one on the land disputes. So this question of land conflict and land disputes, it's one of our research questions. So basically, we have one on all these monetary circuits, and so on, rent-seeking approach and so on. The second one is on agricultural activities and the variabilities. And the third one is on land disputes and land conflicts linked to all these transactions. And of course, there's a question of inequalities behind them. So, and the second question, the rent seekers and the role of surveyors. Yes, of course. So we so in this chain of value. So if you consider all the actors involved in the land transactions, you have also to work in the role of intermediaries and the role also of land professionals and their capital gains. So, for instance, land also is also used as a payment, as a payment remuneration, of course, for the land surveyors and lawyers also. So we also try to quantify this.
In Bamako, the surveyor takes 20% of the plots. Yes. 20%.
Yes.
Just to
delineate. So in Bamako, we work with Monique Bertrand. So she is using a very big quantitative database on land titles. So she has now a database of 400,000 land titles. So she's able to do very, very precise economic categorization of who owns the land. So in the first category is commercial actors, businessmen from Bamako, and the surveyors and the lawyers. I think it's the third category. So she was able to really quantify this capital gains. And the distress sales and bargaining power, in fact, so when we look at the first, the downstream and the customary landholders, so here we have very diverse situations where you have of course, so some landholders, original landholders, they have this power to bargain, they own huge acres of land, they have a very strong political connections, also connections to economic actors and so on. Some of them had the capacity to already invest in some irrigation infrastructure and so on. But it's not the case for other landholders who had also to sell their land very, very quickly because of the climate variabilities. For example, during the drought 2 years ago in Nairobi. So, yeah. But what was interesting is really to follow then the money, what they, the reinvestment of the money, not always in boreholes and irrigation or agricultural infrastructure, but for most of them it was in commercial businesses in small cities.
You emphasize the process where a specific piece of land is broken up into smaller pieces of land. Does your data or your experience contain many situations where you're getting many smaller pieces of land aggregated up into a larger piece of land?
Yes.
And do you know how that process works in different settings?
Yes. So this chain of values, I think it's very also important to consider the materiality of land all along this chain of value. You know? So I worked plot by plot, basically. I spent a month in this locality because first it's difficult to do field work. There is no one. So you have to wait for to find someone to be able to investigate. And it's like plot by plot the history. So first, of course, you have like big size of land. You know, like maybe. In one locality, it was at the beginning, it was 4,000 acres. So we follow all the steps of subdivision of this land, first in 20 acres, and then, you know, it can be divided in 40 plots and so on. So who is in charge of these subdivisions, from where the money comes from, and so on. So yes, this process of land subdivision, you have to. I don't know if I reply to your questions,
but are any of the purchases going the other way from already subdivided land?
Yes, of course. It depends on the financial capacity of the purchaser and of course on their economic strategies. Because some of them they can buy, you know, like 70 plots, you know, just in the process of land accumulation. Then they mortgage most of their property titles and they access credit, and then most of them they reinvest the money in other land portfolios, you know, somewhere else. So of course, and some families again they can buy like 2 or 3 plots. You know, they pull the land and they wait for some time, and they subdivide again the land for their kids, for instance, or to sell the plots to external buyers. So yes. That's why the question is always to follow the money, you know, all the monetary circuits to be able to have a precise also data on the socioeconomic profiles of the buyers, their motivations and their economic strategies, and this materiality of land, you know, like the size of the land and the process of subdivision, extraction also of natural resources, and so on. And I call it the methodology of biography of plots biography. So the changes of uses, changes of materiality, and the question of value and monetary value. The 3 combined aspects.
Great. So we should wrap up. We're just out of time. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Let's chat more over coffee.
Yes, sure.
Where's the feet?
I assume there's coffee.
Oh, there's still coffee. Bring it. Head for yourself. What?
So can I ask? You just said like you got to follow the money.
Yes.
But, like these plots are, people are using them as collateral at banks and like the hospital. Like, is the hospital value? Like, so.
No.
But like what kind of collateral? So I can buy like a plot.
Even if they can pay, you know, like or they cannot. So that's why we have a situation of which
Great, but Like, so, okay, if I'm the hospital, and I'm worried about it's a big difference if that one is at the center of Nairobi.
Yes, but then it's a complex sequence because then the banks they can resell some yeah to some other manufacturers which is banks then buyers. So they have a special bit of yeah.
Right, but it seems like states, if like like also like overvalued, right? So
It's not a question because this is based on speculation of his
right.
in fact, if you look at the prices of land, relate the inflation, the values, in some areas. So, it's more collective explanation.
It's a pretty sweet team, right? People are basically buying up this land. It's accepted.
That's a political
Super interesting.
I read your paper on Tanzania.
Oh, great. I was just going to say. Okay.
Yeah.
So we have like a new one. More recently, we see like exactly a similar issue. Like plots getting lined on the early trend. And like 20 years later, what matters on the there's a lot of vacancy. It's a bit different from the picture you showed us.
Yes.
There is some.
Yeah, Tanzania was one of our case studies in this report.
Okay.
J'étais au comité français. D'accord, d'accord. On parlait des mêmes nouveaux systèmes.
Where do you travel from?
Collaboration. Et puis tout ça.
D'accord.
So you're somewhere.
Ben.
Ah ben.
Quelque chose sur la scène. J'ai perdu aussi, je ne sais pas poser la question. C'est bon, ça. Moi, je travaille quand même avec le consommateur de la scène.
Là, en ce moment, on est en discussion avec qui était à l'OCDE.
Oui, c'est ça, il a dit aussi qu'il avait. Parce que oui, c'est ça. Quand on m'a dit que quelqu'un venait de partir,
il était là. Il est parti bien parce que je crois qu'il a fixé sa thèse dans la cérémonie aujourd'hui à New York.
It's also a private, like,
D'accord, donc lui travaille avec Solid Jones.
Ouais.
Solid Jones, c'est je sais pas si vous connaissez, c'est encore, il a 84 ans, donc il était avant le pont, c'est l'idée de gagner construire des c'est comme ça gère l'extension urbaine et elle se rend compte maintenant que en fait c'est important d'essayer aussi d'avoir une organisation sur notre grading. Ça il en parlait avec 40 ans de recul, moi ça marche. Et ce qui dit maintenant, c'est que tu vois le processus de donc il y a une bonne question, quelle est notre police? Pour accompagner
Well, so yeah.
je pense que la banque et mais je pense que l'étude terrain, dans les détails, la motivation des gens, l'interaction, parce qu'on est dans l'espace, aller dans des espaces, super
Yeah. It's project work. Yeah. So we think it's like it's funny because it could fail because
on avait fait des
so hard. But yeah, upstairs. Two jurisdictions, like whether
c'est notre travail. En fait, le truc là, c'est ça. Maintenant, c'est
yeah.
je suis bien content.
Ouais. Et puis, là, on a une grande recherche en espace. C'est lui qui a bien c'est pas où on l'a
En fait, le championnat national, génial. Je dis, on va dire un papier sur le je suis économiste.
So yeah, I don't know what the so maybe
Okay, that's great.
Je pense que c'est un des travails que moi je fais sur cette question justement par l'accès qu'elles ont à ces données.
I'm sorry.
Ouais, puis c'est une femme. Ah bah oui.
Mais non, pas dans mon
Mais franchement, quand j'étais là, moi, c'est que des histoires. Ah non, mais je pense que là, la neurobis, ça va vraiment être
d'accord.
right.
Et je suis sûre que les informations en c'est vraiment
Right, yeah.
mesuré.
Yeah, how, yeah, we have like this contrast between the decentralization and the like, you need some standardization to make data use.
Yes.
Yes.
So you got
Like you started with individuals connecting with one another and
Yes.
raising very local issues. It needs to be very decentralized.
Absolutely, because during COVID, we had exactly the opposite situation that Indonesia. I can say, sorry, now, some of my students, and then the foreign officer told them, you've got to contact someone. That's absurd, right? That's kind of centralization you're seeing in the country now. It's very totalitarian, so.
Right.
Space.
We have to be
So do you want to give up, I have to publish the sensitivity. All right, benefits over it, but COVID.
explain this.
Right.
He explained this.
So is that,
It's
like, so there's history of that in the US, right? Like
Really
the US Yeah.
perfect.
Delayed the census because like there's too many, I don't know, right, but like too many German migrants. And they need like, it's gonna change that proportionality for electoral college.
Yes.
They delayed the census. I don't know if that's something similar in the US.
This government just wants to go, it's